Welcome to the build guide for the AI003 looping ADSR. I'll be building the circuit in real time. Snapping the board apart and starting with the 10 ohm resistors. If you want to pick this kit up, it's available in PCB, PCB and panel, full kit, and fully tested and built forms at aisynthesis.com. These are the 100K resistors, which are on both the top and the bottom board. Normally I like to do big groups of resistors and diodes, just do them all together and then solder them in. But since this is a build guide how-to tutorial, I'm doing each set of parts on its own. Now we're moving on to the single 33K resistor. And the 100K resistors, the toothbrush I use to clean the boards once I'm done snipping off the parts. I just left it in frame on accident. And the 5.1M resistors. And now moving on to the 1K resistors. Now moving on to the 1M resistors. And there's one 390K resistor. And one 15K resistor. This is actually two resistors. There's one 100 ohm resistor and one 4.7K resistor. These are the last two resistors, so I'm just doing them both at once. Now for the switching diodes. With the diodes done, we're going to add the two IC sockets. One's 8 pins, the other's 14. When they go in, they need to align with the silk screen that's on the circuit board. And here I'm using a slotted mini screwdriver to straighten the pins. You have to be careful when you do this not to scratch the board. And you'll note here that I bend one of the pins not inward but outward, that final pin, to avoid a via point. A via is those tiny holes on the circuit board where one signal passes through to the other side of from the top layer to the bottom layer, or vice versa. Now we're going to add the 6 and 8 pin headers. If you're building this for your rack with the panel that we make, it's very important to make sure that you're putting the headers on the right side, which is the non-silkscreen side. It doesn't matter which one is male and which one's female, so long as they interlock together in this kind of configuration where the two non-screened sides are facing each other. It can sometimes be tricky to get your headers straight, so I like to go ahead and connect them into the sandwich prior to soldering, which I'm trying to do here, and then I solder them in. I'll usually get just a couple pins at first just to kind of tap it into place, and then I'll do the rest of the pins. Now we'll do the 2x5 pin power header. And if you're building this for your rack with the panel, you're going to want to make sure you get this on the right side as well. Otherwise, you'll be trying to hook up your power cable between the two boards, and that's no fun. You can just put it in and then turn the board over, and gravity is going to hold the pins nice and straight for you. Now we'll do the 10 UF capacitors. So usually I say, build low to high. In this case, we kind of are. On the top board, that capacitor gets bent so that it doesn't interfere with the faceplate going on, and that's why there's space left for it below where it goes in. And on the bottom board, we're adding them in even though it is a taller piece, because that's going to give us a little bit of support for the smaller capacitors that we do next. Otherwise, when we were soldering, the weight would be on those smaller 0.1 UF capacitors, and they would bend and be less sturdy. These electrolytic capacitors are polarized, so it's very important to make sure that the side with the stripe in the O, aka the 0, is on the negative side indicated with the minus in the silkscreen, or rather not with the plus, depending on which silkscreen you're looking at. And now we can do the smaller 0.1 UF capacitors. There's quite a few of those. And finally, for the last piece on the bottom board, the 2N3906 transistor. Once we get this in, we'll go ahead and put in our ICs. Now we're onto the top board, and we're going to start with the jacks. The jacks are actually pretty easy to do if you know how to do them right. You just set them flat, and then I'm just going to solder in those ground lugs and leave the other lugs. Otherwise, these can be a little bit tricky. They'll want to sit askew in one direction or another, and they're not very easy to desolder and resolder. They stick in their holes pretty securely, and when you're pulling on them and pulling them apart from the lugs, those switches can come out. So it's really important to get them right the first time, and tacking them down with just the ground lugs is a great way to do that. You'll notice that I do go back over those ground lugs to reflow the solder from this side of the board. You don't want to leave it with just that initial tack on. You want to make sure it goes all the way through. Time for the momentary switch and the potentiometers. The momentary goes right in there, and we're doing that at the same time as the others because when you'll be turning it over to solder it, that will help it balance a little bit. And it stays in there pretty sturdily. I'm doing all the pots at the same time because there's no real reason not to. Starting with them out of the bag, you have to unscrew the nut and the washer. And then you'll want to go with a diagonal cutter and remove these little nibs that are right at the front and annoyingly just out of frame. Otherwise the panel won't sit quite nicely. They're really easy to cut, especially with the diagonal cutters. You don't want to use your micro shears, which is the tool I have in the light blue handle, because those micro shears aren't very strong, and if you do that you'll get them really dull and possibly even snap the blade. So use the heavier duty directional covers for these guys. This is out of frame and I apologize, but they fit in. I'm going to make an error here in a moment and accidentally bend one of the leads, so you'll get to see me desolder as well. Sometimes these legs can be a little tricky. This is me struggling with them for way too long and cursing the whole time because I'm on camera. And I haven't yet noticed that one of the other pot legs is bent and not actually through the hole, but I'll see that soon. If I was doing the build video over, I probably would have put the panel on at this point in time just to make sure that that momentary switch was really straight. In the end, when I put it on, it wasn't that straight, and I had to bend it a little bit, which is not good. In the other test builds I had done, I hadn't needed to do that, so I'm wondering if that was just because I had to desolder and it ended up getting bent in the process. Each pot has the 3 legs and then the 2 kind of bigger areas, and those don't do anything electrically. They're just there to keep the potentiometer in place as you turn it against the panel. Here's where I notice that that 3rd leg, the one closest to me, isn't actually coming through. So I have to desolder it. Luckily, I hadn't put any solder in the big pads yet, because then I would have a mess on my hands. A lot of people like a desoldering braid. They've never really worked that great for me, and I don't know why. I'm sure I'm not doing it quite correctly. I've seen videos on it. It seems like I should be, but I just have never had that much luck with them. So whenever I can, and static isn't a worry, I'll use the desoldering pump instead. Now for the DP/DT switch and the LED. The LED has a little clear spacer that I'll be using. The switch goes in there with its red cap on. You can put that on afterwards. I was moving things around there because I couldn't see the spacer. When that goes on, the LED is polarized. There's a flat spot on the LED and there's a flat spot on the silk screen, so you just line it up. The spacer that comes in the full kit is the exact same size you need. You can do it without a spacer, but having done it both with and without, the spacer is a great way to get it exactly the way you want it. It's just regular 5mm LED spacer. And before I solder the switch on and the LED, I like to put the panel on, just to make sure they'll be aligned perfectly. Especially because unlike the momentary switch, the DP/DT switch, double pole, double throw switch, is a little bit loose in the PCB. Now I'm peeling off the panel cover, the protective plastic cover that comes. You may not notice it sometimes, and you may think, man, this is just a janky panel. It's a nice panel. It's just got a cover on it. And then I'm just test mounting some of the hardware. Thanks for watching. Again, this kit is available at aisynthesis.com.